Today, we will also discuss dimensionality and movements to a variety of different dimensions. Imagine you're a spectator looking inside a box, a three-dimensional box from outside. You can see all three dimensions of that box. Or more easily, you're inside that box and you're looking at one of these pictures on the wall, which are two-dimensional. You can see that whole picture. From the top, from the outside, you can look in terms of dimensions. And you can extend this forward and forward and forward until you have one dimension more than the previous one. This goes on to the end, infinitely. And so we have this concept of infinity and the finite. And it's fascinating that from a mathematical point of view, and also from an experimental point of view, the only way one can develop a theory of everything is looking at the finite and linking it up with the infinite.
Dimensions. What really are they? You know, we talk about the fifth dimension, or going into the fourth dimension, or even the sixth dimension, but these are layperson uses of the term. When we talk about dimensions, as in our model, our metaparadigm, our theory of everything, triadic dimensional distinction vortical paradigm, we're not just talking about any kind of term, we're talking about a real phenomenon, a real mathematical term. So for example, if you take space, space has length, breadth and height. That means it is measurable, it has extent. That reflects three dimensions. And we are motivating that there is more than one dimension of time. We actually just talk about a moment in time, the present, but there's also a past and a future. That would be one dimension of time. Now what happens if something turns off before one reaches one? Would that imply a second dimension? It's far more complicated than that. But essentially, we are postulating in our model that there are likely three finite dimensions of time. And in our model, we link up a broader consciousness. And let's look at this just at the quantal level, what we call the qualit level, because consciousness is not generally included in a quantum. And we postulate that there are different dimensions of consciousness. So of the first 9 dimensions, it is likely, using our model, that there are 3 space dimensions and 3 time dimensions and 3 consciousness dimensions. Now you might say, yeah, I've heard of that. For example, there are 10 dimensions in string theory. Some people talk about 11 and some have even gone to 26. Bottom line there is one is talking about spaces. Most of the time, a lot of people refer to them in terms of dimensions of space, or it's undefined if this is space and time. For us, mathematically, this is very much defined. We're talking space, time, and consciousness as the first 9 dimensions. And then we have a 10th, what I call 10 plus, because you get to numbers that are so high that although technically you could count it, that's called countable infinity, it's actually transfinite. And each of them are still little specks, little spots. And this is the 10th transfinite dimension. And then we go beyond this. Each one of these dimensions are measurable. In other words, they're discrete. They have little points. And sometimes these points are not equal together. We call that interval when they're equal together. They are ordinal. Good, better, best, for example. Big, bigger, biggest. And this is particularly so when we start talking about consciousness and these other dimensions. So in essence, when we talk about dimensions, we're talking about a real mathematical phenomenon of extent, a variable of extent. And space, time, and consciousness are examples of extent, as opposed to, for example, mass and energy. These are examples of content. These are not dimensions, but they are content within the dimensions. And each of space, time, and consciousness reflect a series of separate dimensions, but they are all tethered together. They're inseparable. There's always a linkage of space, time, and consciousness. Fascinating concept. Different from the layperson, different from string theory, but a good start in terms of trying to understand why we are doing this. We're not doing it just for fun. We're doing it because, as we see it, the current standard model of physics works 99.99% of the time, but it doesn't work that tiny 0.01% of the time. There's certain things wrong. For example, so-called extrasensory perception doesn't fit that kind of fabric, and we're trying to fit everything.
And I'm talking to you about models, for example, of consciousness, and of dimensions, and of the finite and the infinite. And these are topics that I will talk about more in my lectures and in my book, for example, on our model of TDVP. This book is available for download as an electronic book. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure having this opportunity to discuss this very relevant topic with you. Thank you so much for listening.